Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our live coverage of the latest mission from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Will Robinson Smith will be conducting our commentary for the duration of this coverage. We are broadcasting, as we always do, from the Spaceflight Now News Bureau here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. Hope you've all had a wonderful, productive week so far, and we appreciate you being with us as we close out the work week, turn our attention almost to the weekend. We kick off this Friday morning with the planned launch of a Falcon 9 rocket at Pad 40, Space Launch Complex 40, Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. 23 Starlink V2 mini satellites are on board this particular Falcon flight. The most Starlink satellites to fly in a single batch that also feature direct-to-cell capable Starlinks. We'll talk more about the payload, where it's going, as we continue on through the countdown. But first off, I want to thank the little more than 700 of you who are joining with us live at the start of the broadcast. Certainly appreciate you all being here with us this Friday morning. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking the like button, sharing the stream. Allow some more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage. Our team this morning consists of our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, who's running the technical operations of the broadcast. Our photographers, Adam Bernstein, Michael Kane, have this launch off, but we are very fortunate to be joined once again by our friend John Pisani, who's going to be helping us out with some tracking views of the Falcon 9 once it takes off from Space Launch Complex 40. We're also joined in tracking assistance by our friends Pete Carstens with Max Q Productions, as well as Chuck and Jen Briggs with C&J Images. In the live chat today, I want to thank our moderators helping us out. I see Rick Donner, Callistia Lee, and Aussie Space Girl helping us out today. If you see any of the other mods cruise on in, be sure to give them a big old hello. These live broadcasts are made possible by the continuous support of our wonderful channel member community here on YouTube. So thanks to folks like Sulfur for Lunch, Butterfly, Joni Mahoney, Will Pellner, Sandra Morin, and many others. Channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop. That is shop.spacelightnow.com. Access to member-only videos here on YouTube, access to our members-only Discord server, and, of course, the ability to watch all of our live launch moments from here at the Cape in 4K. Speaking of our channel member community, I want to thank our moderator and channel member, Callistia Lee, for gifting 10 Spaceflight Now memberships. Appreciate that generosity. To our 10 newest channel members, welcome aboard. We're glad to have you with us. If you haven't already, be sure to thank Callistia on the live chat, and we hope you decide to stick around with channel membership beyond the month you were gifted. Also see Callistia marking 17 months with us as a channel member at the launch director level, who says, "Time does fly when you're having fun. Thanks for letting me be a small part of this Spaceflight Now." Well, we certainly appreciate all the hard moderating work that you've been doing for us, Callistia. Couldn't do without you. Last little bit of housekeeping. If you have a comment or question about this mission or other goings-on in the realm of space and spaceflight, you can use the YouTube Super Chat feature. Not only will you be giving us some interesting things to talk about as we cruise on through the countdown, but you'll be supporting what we do here at Spaceflight Now, and that is always greatly appreciated, especially when it comes to moments where we're going to be on the road bringing you on-the-ground reporting, as is going to be the case coming up next week. In fact, we are hitting the road once again for a couple of different events to bring to you. Of course, on Monday over in Houston at the Johnson Space Center, there's going to be a Crew 10 briefing, actually a couple of briefings there at JSC, in addition to an opportunity to speak with the astronauts who are not only flying on board as part of the Crew 10 contingency, those 3 astronauts and 1 cosmonaut, but you also have NASA astronaut Johnny Kim, who is flying as a crew member on board the Soyuz MS-27 mission, which is set to lift off from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in April. So we look forward to being on the ground there in Houston, seeing all the fine folks at JSC, and talking to our wonderful astronaut corps about their upcoming mission to the space station. And of course, getting updates and being able to ask questions of both NASA and SpaceX leadership, as there's quite a bit to discuss these days. So looking forward to that opportunity. And then continuing on, as appears to be the case, now we'll throw just a giant asterisk around this one, that there are indications that Starship Flight 8 may, and I will lean heavily on the word may in this sentence, be launching next week, although a firm date has not been announced or formally speculated by SpaceX. There are some notices that have gone out as far as warnings regarding the launch of Starship that begin on February 26th, extend, I believe, to March 10th. So we plan to be in position, of course, well in time to support live coverage from Starbase in partnership with our friends Lab Padre, whose camera view you're looking at right now there at Launch Tower 1. Right now there's no rocket there at the moment, but I believe there is a road closure in place today, so we might see some movement of Booster 15. You can always head over to either Launchpad Live here on the Spaceflight Now channel, or for an abundance of views from the various points around Starbase, you can head over to Lab Padre's YouTube channel and check those out at your convenience. Bringing things back here close to home, we're T-minus 52 minutes, 32 seconds, and counting from the planned liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket that you see there out at the pad. Liftoff currently set for 10:19 a.m. Eastern. That is 15:19 UTC for our friends around the world. This is close to the end of the launch window today for SpaceX, which lasts until 10:25. If for whatever reason SpaceX is unable to launch today, they do have another backup opportunity with the window opening up tomorrow. That is Saturday, February 22nd at 6:17 a.m. Eastern, 11:17 UTC. Talking weather, this is a bit of a blustery day, a little chilly by Florida standards, as we're looking for the launch of this Falcon 9 rocket. Fortunately, it's not a very cloudy day, but the winds are something that the launch weather officers over at the 45th Weather Squadron are keeping an eye on. Here's a satellite view looking down at the southeast. You can see, obviously, the cloud layer around. A little bit better view here from the Ghost East satellite. Meteorologists forecast an 85% chance of favorable weather conditions for a liftoff today, with winds that were tracking between 22 and 27 miles per hour. No additional risks listed for this particular flight. Upper level wind shear, booster recovery weather, both listed as low on a scale of low to medium to high. In a 24-hour backup scenario, if for whatever reason SpaceX is unable to launch today, the overall launch forecast is, broadly speaking, the same. It's an 85% chance of favorable weather conditions. The liftoff winds are less of a concern. However, the thick cloud layers rule and the cumulus cloud rule both come into play in that 24-hour backup scenario. So breezy today, cloudy tomorrow, and we will see what SpaceX has in store for a launch. But as far as what we have in store here for the next 49 minutes and some change, let's go ahead and talk about that countdown timeline, shall we? This is the nominal sequence of events for Falcon 9 fueling and preparation for flight. It'll begin nominally at the T-minus 38-minute mark when the SpaceX launch director will give their go for the start of prop load. SpaceX takes its readiness poll electronically, so if they're in a good posture, they can do this a little bit early. Once fueling begins at the T-minus 35-minute mark, RP-1, or a rocket-grade kerosene, will begin flowing on board the Falcon 9's first and second stages. And at the same time, liquid oxygen will begin to flow on board the Falcon 9's first stage. T-minus 30 minutes is when they start loading cryogenic helium into the pressure vessels on the Falcon 9's first stage as well. Helium is important because it's used to pressurize the main propellant tanks during flight. Same will be true on the second stage a few minutes thereafter. T-minus 23 minutes is when the second stage RP-1 tank should be full. Then T-minus 20 minutes and 50 seconds is when they begin to chill the feed lines in preparation for second stage liquid oxygen load. We'll see this manifest as the so-called big vent at about T-minus 20 minutes and 20 seconds here at pad 40. That venting will last until roughly T-minus 16 minutes and 30 seconds. And at the bottom of that minute, second stage LOX load will begin. T-minus 7 minutes is when the chill down of the 9 Merlin engines gets underway. That process involves flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps, helping to protect the engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. About 6 minutes out, the first stage kerosene tank is full. Then at T-minus 4.5 minutes, we'll see the strong back retract sequence. It's when the clamp arms just beneath the payload fairings open up, and then the strong back, or the transporter erector, reclines a few degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket, and it stays in that position until liftoff. At that point, it'll pull back in a much more rapid fashion to clear the way for the vertical climb of the Falcon 9. 3 minutes before liftoff, the first stage liquid oxygen tank is full. Same is true in the second stage, about a minute thereafter, at which point the Falcon 9 is fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. In the final 60 seconds, as we hear the call that the Falcon 9 is in startup, control of the countdown is handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers, and the propellant tanks are brought up to flight pressure. SpaceX launch director will give their go for launch at T-minus 45 seconds. The engine ignition command is issued at T-minus 3 seconds. And if all 9 Merlins are healthy and ignite as expected, the command will be given for the hold down clamps to release the Falcon 9 rocket for a T0 liftoff. Once again, coming up at 10:19 a.m. Eastern, 15:19 UTC. We're in T-minus 46 minutes, 49 seconds. Time now, T-minus 44 minutes, 39 seconds and counting. As we've begun doing recently, we're keeping tabs on the most flown boosters in SpaceX's Falcon fleet, as the company is tracking towards certifying its fleet for up to 40 launches apiece. As it so happens, one of those frequent flyers is going to be taking off on today's mission. We'll come up to them. They hold the number 5 spot, but we start, of course, with the number 1. That is B-1067 with 26 flights to its name so far. Next two, tied for second place, B-1063 and 1071. That's followed up currently by rocket in the 4th spot, B-1069, which will soon be tied by the rocket flying today. That is B-1076, which currently has 20 missions, going for launch number 21 today. As of SpaceX's most recent launch on February 18th, here's where they currently stand as far as launches year over year with their Falcon family of rockets. A little bit later in the broadcast, we'll take a look back in time and check in with the flight history of this particular booster launching today, B-1076. Now T-minus 42 minutes, 33 seconds and counting. Taking a look at our live chat here. I want to thank a few folks for their support today. Thanks to Chris Kubadlansky joining us with channel membership at the pad leader level. Welcome aboard, Chris. We're glad to have you with us. I also want to thank channel member Rocket Lady Elizabeth for a $5 super chat. Really appreciate that, Elizabeth. I hope you're doing well today. As SpaceX is preparing to take its poll for the start of prop load today, let's go ahead and talk about where this Falcon 9 rocket is going to be heading once it leaves the pad. Let's talk a little trajectory, shall we? As has been the case with all the missions that are part of the Group 12 batch of Starlink satellites, once this Falcon 9 is ready to leave the pad at Space Launch Complex 40, it will fly in a southeasterly trajectory, heading away from Florida's Space Coast. Following stage separation, the first stage booster, B-1076, will target a landing on one of SpaceX's 3 drone ships. Of course, currently they still have 2 of those stationed here on the East Coast. One of them is actually making its way into port as we speak. That is, just read the instructions, which means the one on tap today is a shortfall of gravitas. If this booster landing is successful with this venture, it will mark the 99th booster landing on this particular drone ship and the 411th booster landing successfully for SpaceX to date. As I mentioned, they are working to certify their first stage boosters for up to 40 flights apiece. Same is true with their payload fairings. Most recent SpaceX update on this is that they save about $6 million per recovery effort, and they will splash down in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean under the control of steerable parachutes. Once in the water, they will be brought aboard a recovery vessel, brought back to Port Canaveral here on the Space Coast, and then driven over to the Hangar X site there at the Kennedy Space Center, where they will be examined, refurbished, and turned around for future missions. Now T-minus 37 minutes, 37 seconds and counting. At this point, SpaceX should have conducted its pull for the beginning of the fueling process, assuming they're still targeting 10:19 a.m. Eastern, 15:19 UTC for the liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket from Pad 40. As we're awaiting the start of fueling with this Falcon flight, let's go ahead and talk about the payload that's on board this particular rocket. 23 Starlink V2 mini satellites with 13 direct-to-cell capable ones. The photo in the middle of your screen is from a previous Starlink mission. Last year, SpaceX said that they introduced what they are calling the optimized version of a Starlink V2 mini satellite, with those being considerably lighter at about 1,267 pounds or about 575 kilograms. Previous Starlink V2 minis were about 800 kilograms by comparison. SpaceX has not distinguished between the former Starlink V2 minis and the optimized ones when they do have a Starlink launch, so it's hard to determine exactly how many of them have flown, how many of them are flying, how many of them may be on this mission today, given that the previous Starlink flights that have also included the direct-to-cell capable satellites have been capped at 21 apiece. This is the first time that there are 23 on board this flight. One could conclude that there are some number of the optimized V2 minis flying today, but without confirmation from SpaceX, it's hard to make a firm determination about that. Nevertheless, with their solar panels unfurled, these Starlink satellites have a wingspan of about 100 feet or 30 meters. They use Argon Hall thrusters for in-orbit maneuvering. They were built in Redmond, Washington, which is near Seattle. And they'll be deployed at about 180 miles or 291 kilometers in altitude at a 43 degrees inclination. Now at T-minus 34 minutes, 41 seconds and counting, SpaceX should be in the process of loading propellant on board its Falcon 9 rocket. RP-1 flowing on board the Falcon 9's first and second stages, liquid oxygen flowing on board just the first stage. Typically for Starlink missions in recent history, SpaceX has not published notice of when they start propellant loading, so need to rely on visual cues for knowing if in fact prop is flowing on board the Falcon 9 rocket. It's going to be a little tricky today though with the timing of this launch and the unfortunate amount of wind that is out here. Got a combination of wind-caused camera shake and heat distortion, which that in combination with the position of the sun does not make for an easy determination of if prop load has gotten underway. No, T minus 32 minutes, 1 second and counting. Just to give you an idea of the wind shake problem I was talking about just a second ago. It is making our cameras bounce a little bit. We're working to try to counteract that. So bear with us as we make some of these changes. That said, even through the wind shake, if you look just above the tree line near the base of the Falcon 9 rocket, you can start to make out what appears to be a frost line forming as the super cold liquid oxygen begins flowing on board the Falcon 9's first stage. So it does in fact appear that SpaceX is fueling its Falcon 9 rocket, which means that they are targeting that T0 time of 10:19 a.m. Eastern, 15:19 UTC. When SpaceX has started fueling, they are unable to hold the countdown because they use that super cold densified liquid oxygen. Now T minus 29 minutes and counting. At this point, SpaceX is also loading cryogenic helium into the pressure vessels on the Falcon 9's first stage. The helium will be used to pressurize the main propellant tanks during flight. Also, for those keeping track of other orbital missions that are coming up next week, there have been a couple of shifts in that schedule in just the last couple of hours here this morning. The launch of the second Ariane 6 rocket from down in French Guiana was scheduled for the morning of the 26th. That's this coming Wednesday. That launch has been postponed. A new launch date has not yet been announced. Meanwhile, the next Falcon 9 rocket set to, well, I guess not the next one, but one of the next Falcon 9 rockets set to lift off from Vandenberg Space Force Base following tomorrow's planned launch of this Starlink 15-1 mission. That's going to be a couple of NASA payloads, the SpaceX mission, along with PUNCH. SpaceX is an acronym standing for Spectrophotometer for the History of the Universe, Epoch and Reionization, and ICES Explorer. Bit of a mouthful. SpaceX is much shorter. PUNCH is the polarimeter to unify the Corona and Heliosphere mission. It's a joint flight for these two distinct missions that was set to lift off on Thursday the 27th, now targeting a launch at 10:09 p.m. Eastern or 7:09 p.m. Pacific on Friday the 28th. In its statement announcing the delay, NASA said that the new date, quote, will allow additional time to ensure the vehicle's readiness ahead of liftoff, end quote. Time now, T-minus 25 minutes and counting, as we get ready to see this Falcon 9 rocket lift off with a booster flying for a 21st time. Let's go ahead and take a spin through its history. But before we do, I want to thank the now roughly 2,800 of you that are joining with us live. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking the like button. Allows more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage. This booster began its flight history back in 2022 in November. That was a launch for NASA sending a Cargo Dragon spacecraft on its way to the International Space Station. Its 26th commercial resupply services mission for SpaceX, with more than 7,700 pounds of cargo and science in tow. Second launch came on January 10th of 2023. That was the OneWeb Flight 16 mission, the second of 3 dedicated launches on behalf of OneWeb satellites for its internet constellation. Reader's Digest backstory on that: after Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, OneWeb lost the Soyuz rocket as a launch vehicle for its constellation, turned to 3 flights from SpaceX and 2 from India to put its remaining Gen 1 constellation of satellites on orbit. Third flight for this booster, February 27th, when it launched the very first batch of Starlink V2 mini satellites. That was on the Starlink 6-1 mission. And that was followed on April 7th, when it supported the launch of Intelsat 40E. This is a communications satellite that also included a hosted NASA payload called the Tropospheric Emissions Monitoring of Pollution, or TEMPO instrument. This is a UV visible spectrometer that monitors air pollutants hourly across North America. Measures things like nitrogen dioxide, and during the daytime, it can track pollutants like ozone, sulfur dioxide, and formaldehyde, and at night it can track light pollution. Launches 5 through 8 were all Starlink missions. You had Starlink 6-3 on May 19th, Starlink 6-6 on July 24th, Starlink 6-14 on September 9th, and 6-21 on October 5th. Launch number 9 carried the O3B mPOWER 5 and 6 satellites. That was on behalf of one of SpaceX's longest-standing customers, SES. Flight number 10 was the Ovzon 3 satellite on behalf of the company Ovzon, lifting off on January 3rd of last year. Launch number 11, batch of 23 Starlink satellites on the Starlink 6-40 mission, lifting off from Pad 40 on Leap Day of last year. Followed up by the launch of Eutelsat 36D for French satellite operator Eutelsat, lifting off on March 30th. Next up was a pair of Starlink satellites, or Starlink satellite missions. You had 6-54 on April 28th and 6-64 on June 1st. Launch number 15 was the Turksat 6A mission on July 8th. Flight number 16 was the second pair of Worldview Legion satellites for the company Maxar, lifting off on August 15th. Two more Starlink satellites on deck here. Starlink 8-19 on October 18th and 6-68 on November 14th. Launch number 19, the penultimate launch so far, December 5th of last year, which sent the SXM-9 satellite into GEO for SiriusXM. And finally, most recently, flight number 20 was Starlink 12-7 on January 27th. And we are now just about 20 seconds away from seeing the start of the so-called Big Vent, as SpaceX is preparing to, or is in the process of, conditioning the feed lines there at the pad ahead of second stage liquid oxygen load. And there you see the start of the so-called Big Vent. This process will last until roughly T-minus 16 minutes and 30 seconds ahead of second stage liquid oxygen load at the 16-minute mark. We're now currently T-minus 20 minutes and counting. Now T-minus 17 minutes and counting. Roughly 30 seconds left on this venting process before liquid oxygen starts flowing on board the Falcon 9's second stage. Now T-minus 16 minutes and counting. Now T-minus 14 minutes, 34 seconds and counting. As we've gone through the countdown timeline and the trajectory, let's go ahead and talk about the launch timeline for today's mission. The post-liftoff sequence of events for a nominal flight of this Falcon 9 rocket. The vehicle will pass through max Q with a point of greatest aerodynamic pressure at roughly T plus 10 or 1 minute and 10 seconds. That will be followed by a trio of events in fairly rapid succession. We'll see first stage main engine cutoff, or MECO, at T plus 2 minutes and 25 seconds. That'll be followed 3 seconds afterwards by stage separation, then the ignition of the Merlin vacuum engine on the Falcon 9's second stage. Finally, at the T plus 3 minutes and 4 second mark, we'll see the payload fairings jettison, as they will no longer be needed in the flight. They'll splash down to the waters of the Atlantic Ocean under the support of parachutes. Roughly 3 minutes after that, the first stage entry burn will begin, where 3 of the Merlin engines on the Falcon booster will reignite in a burn that will slow the vehicle down, lasting roughly 24 seconds in duration. First stage landing burn begins at T plus 7 minutes and 48 seconds. Just one Merlin engine used on this particular part of the flight, setting up for a drone ship landing at T plus 8 minutes and 13 seconds. The upper stage engine will conclude its first burn roughly 20 seconds after that. Falcon 9 upper stage will then enter into a coast phase, where it will cruise until about T plus 54 minutes and 4 seconds. There will be a brief 1 second burn to help circularize the orbit. Then the Starlink satellites on board will be deployed at about T plus 1 hour, 5 minutes, and 12 seconds. Because SpaceX doesn't extend its broadcast for Starlink missions out to the point of deployment, we'll have to turn to their social channels for confirmation of a good deployment. Now T plus 11 minutes, 44 seconds and counting. With the launch timeline out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about the workhorse vehicle for SpaceX that's going to be taken to the skies as this Falcon in the view is kind of gracing us with its presence. Let's go ahead and talk about the Falcon 9, which stands 70 meters or 229 feet tall and has a diameter of 3.66 meters or 12 feet. Majority of that, of course, is made up by the Falcon 9's first stage. The bottom two-thirds of the rocket. This particular booster, B-1076, has flown 20 times up to today. Looking for flight number 21 here in just about 11 minutes. At the base, the first stage booster are 9 Merlin engines, which burn rocket-grade kerosene and liquid oxygen, producing 1.7 million pounds of thrust. Around the engine compartment are black carbon fiber landing legs that will be used to land the first stage on the drone ship, a short fall of gravitas. Above the first stage is the inner stage. This is a composite structure consisting of an aluminum honeycomb core, which is surrounded by carbon fiber. In the image on the right-hand side of your screen, you can see the deployable hypersonic grid fins. These are titanium winglets that provide stability and steering for the Falcon 9 as it comes back through the atmosphere, tail first like a big old dart heading towards the drone ship. At the top of the inner stage are 3 mechanical latches that attach to the second stage. And at first stage main engine cutoff, high-pressure helium is used to release those latches, and 4 pneumatic pushers ensure clean separation. Also, the second stage engine nozzle is housed safely inside the inner stage adapter until stage separation. T-minus 10 minutes and counting, and speaking of that second stage, upper stage of the Falcon 9 powered by a single modified Merlin engine called a Merlin vacuum engine, or an MVac engine. It's equipped with a large nozzle which is optimized for burns in the vacuum of space, hence the name. It produces more than 220,500 pounds of thrust, and it will be fired twice on today's flight, placing the 23 Starlink satellites into their intended orbit. The MVac engine, as with the first stage, burns the same propellant mix, that being RP1 and LOX. Following the deployment of the Starlink satellites, it will ignite for a third time to perform a deorbit burn, helping to drive the upper stage back into the atmosphere, where it's intended to burn up and help to eliminate the risk of creating unnecessary space debris on this mission. Of course, we recently saw the impacts of what an unplanned entry can do with some apparent debris from a recent Falcon 9 Starlink launch, I believe it was Starlink 11-4, that ended up near Ukraine after SpaceX was unable to perform a correct deorbit burn. Finally, at the top of the Falcon 9 stack are the payload fairings that encapsulate the 23 Starlink satellites. Fairing halves are made up of a carbon composite material and are 13.1 meters or 43 feet tall, and are 5.2 meters or 17.1 feet in diameter. 2 fairing halves will be recovered a little further downrange from where the first stage lands on the drone ship. They gently splash down under the support of steerable parachutes. Now T-minus 8 minutes and counting. Taking a look at our live chat here, I want to thank the now nearly 7,800, a little more than 7,800 of you that are joining with us live. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking the like button and sharing the stream. Allows more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage today. Also want to welcome a new channel member, Jose Duddy, joining us with channel membership at the pad leader level. Welcome aboard, Jose. We're glad to have you with us. As a reminder, channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop, that is shop.spaceflightnow.com, access to our members-only videos here on YouTube, access to our members-only Discord server, and the ability to watch all the live launch liftoff moments from here at the Cape in 4K. Also want to thank Christopher Lemke for gifting a Spaceflight Now membership. Appreciate that generosity, Chris. And to our newest channel member, welcome aboard to you. We're glad to have you with us. If you haven't already, be sure to thank Chris in the live chat. And I'll extend that same thank you as well to Adrian R., one of our channel members, for gifting 10 Spaceflight Now memberships. Really appreciate that, Adrian. And now a second welcome to our newest 10 members. We're glad to have you all on board. Now T-minus 5 minutes and counting. At this point, the engine chill has
Falcon
already
9 tanks are pressurizing for strong back lower.
Gotten underway. The first stage kerosene tank is full. And as you just heard, they're in the process of pressurizing for a strong back retract. And you can see even out at the pad there at Space Launch Complex 40, there's a little bit of camera shake.
Strong back lower has started.
Even with those camera views. Really nice view out there at Space Launch Complex 40. Very light clouds around the area, so it should be a very fine liftoff today. You see those clamp arms just beneath the payload fairings are opening up. And soon that structure just off to the side of the Falcon 9, the strong back, will recline a few degrees away from the vehicle. It's just a quick note here. You'll see the difference between our countdown clock in the upper right-hand corner of the screen and what you're seeing from SpaceX in the big box. The reason for the discrepancy is our clock is in real time, as we're now 3 minutes and 30 seconds out. What you're seeing from SpaceX is coming in on a slight delay. So as long as we have views of the rocket from our tracking cameras, we'll be making those callouts in real time until we're relying exclusively on the SpaceX onboard cameras. As we're approaching the 3-minute mark, the first stage liquid oxygen tank should finish topping off right about now.
Stage 1 LOX load complete.
Good call from SpaceX. We're now awaiting a similar call on the second stage. Just a little more than 20 seconds away from conclusion of second stage LOX load in real time. Two minutes and counting. Also want to thank channel member Mark Potochnik for gifting a Spaceflight Now membership. Appreciate
Stage
that,
2
Mark.
LOX load complete.
With that call, the Falcon 9 is now fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. The venting you're seeing there are the ground gas closeouts. Less than a minute and a half to go.
Gas launch closeouts has started.
Good call from SpaceX. Now T-minus 1 minute and counting.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
With that call, we're just waiting for the SpaceX launch director to give their go for launch, which should be coming here in the next few seconds.
Launch director, go for launch.
And with that confirmation, we are now less than 30 seconds away from seeing this Falcon fly. 20 seconds. 15 seconds. And here we go. In 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine ignition. And liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket on this Starlink 12-14 mission. The Falcon 9 has cleared the tower. Some great tracking by the team as we're now a little more than a minute into this flight. Falcon 9 is approaching max Q, the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle.
Max Q.
Good call from SpaceX, now about a minute and a half into flight. At this point, SpaceX is preparing to thermally condition the Merlin vacuum engine ahead of its first burn. Now 2 minutes into flight. See a few events in fairly rapid succession. The first stage main engine cutoff at about 2 minutes and 25 seconds into flight. That'll be followed by stage separation and then the ignition of that Merlin vacuum engine just past the 2.5 minute mark. Coming up on MECO. There you see MECO. Stage separation. And back engine start.
Main engine cut off.
Stage separation confirmed.
MVAC ignition.
Good calls from SpaceX and some great tracking views by our team today. Now a little more than 3 minutes into flight. Payload should be deploying. Payload fairings, excuse me. There you see those fairings separate falling away from the Falcon 9's upper stage.
Bearing separation confirmed.
Good call, good visuals from SpaceX as now those Starlink satellites exposed to the vacuum of space for the first time on this mission. Now a little more than 3.5 minutes into flight in real time. The next big event is coming up at T plus 6 minutes and 2 seconds when 3 of the engines on the Falcon first stage booster will come back to life for a roughly 24-second entry burn, beginning to slow the vehicle down. At this point, the booster is still climbing, has not quite reached its apogee in the mission so far. Those occasional puffs that you're seeing in between the grid fins on the SpaceX onboard cameras and occasionally from our tracking cameras when we had eyes on the booster, those are the cold gas thrusters. Those help control the attitude or the positioning of the vehicle as it makes its way towards the drone ship. That booster, now at about 114 kilometers in altitude, it appears to have reached its apogee today. Yes, and is now starting to make its descent towards the drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas. Little hard to see amid the clouds here, but that lighter dot that we're following, that is the Falcon 9's upper stage as it continues to make its ascent at about 147 kilometers in altitude and approaching 12,000 kilometers per hour. A little more than 5.5 minutes into flight at this point in real time. We are scanning the skies to see if we can catch the entry burn with our ground tracking cameras. If we're able to see it, we'll of course bring that to you. If not, we will rely on the onboard cameras from SpaceX. Entry burn should be beginning right about now in real time.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
Stage 1 AFTS has saved.
Entry burn wrapping up in real time.
Stage 1 entry burn shutdown.
Now 7 minutes into flight in real time.
Stage 2 AFTS has saved.
That AFTS is the automated flight termination system, now no longer needed at this stage in the mission. Because of the distance and how close to the horizon the landing burn will begin, we unfortunately won't be able to see that from our on-the-ground tracking cameras, so we'll be relying on SpaceX's cameras at this point in flight.
Stage 1 transonic.
The first stage travels now below the speed of sound. The start of the landing burn set to begin at roughly T plus 7 minutes and 48 seconds.
Stage 1 landing burn.
Stage 2 internal guidance.
Landing leg deploy. Stage 1 landing confirmed.
And for 21st time, Beat 1076 is safely landed.
MVAC shut down.
And with the conclusion of that upper stage engine burn, didn't hear the call for this, but presumably the upper stage will have entered into a nominal parking orbit where it will coast until roughly T plus 54 minutes and 4 seconds. There will be a brief 1 second burn at that point to circularize the orbit. And the Starlink satellites will then be deployed at roughly T plus 1 hour, 5 minutes, and 12 seconds. And with a good liftoff and landing of this first stage booster, let's go ahead and take a look at our mission stats as they currently stand. This mission, Starlink 12-14, marked the 439th Falcon 9 launch to date. And with 11 Falcon Heavy launches, this was SpaceX's 450th Falcon flight so far. This is the 22nd Falcon 9 launch of 2025, the 383rd Falcon booster reflight, or the launch of a booster that has flown at least once. This is SpaceX's 22nd orbital launch of the year, given that there have been no Falcon Heavies as of yet. This was their 140th orbital launch within the last 365 days, the 235th orbital flight for SpaceX from this particular launch pad, and the 289th overall orbital launch from Pad 40. Here's where the bar chart currently stands with the Falcon family of rockets. Moving on to some recovery stats, this is the 99th successful booster landing on the drone ship, a shortfall of Gravitas, out of 100 attempts. This was the 329th SpaceX drone ship landing and the 411th overall successful booster landing for SpaceX. Finally, with some industry stats, this was the 17th orbital flight from the Sunshine State of Florida, the 23rd orbital launch from U.S. soil, the 25th from a U.S. rocket company, including the 2 from Rocket Lab down in New Zealand, and this was the 35th orbital launch attempt around the globe, all of which have successfully deployed their payloads as intended. Here's where the bar chart currently, or excuse me, the pie chart now currently stands. And that will go ahead and do it for us today with this Starlink 12-15 or 12-14 flight. Appreciate you all being with us throughout the duration of it. Barring any schedule change, the next Falcon mission coming up is going to be tomorrow. That is the Starlink 15-1 flight from Vandenberg Space Force Base, with liftoff at no earlier than 2:42 p.m. Pacific, 5:42 p.m. Eastern, 22:42 UTC for our friends around the world. And of course, we kick off a very, very busy week in space flight. You've got the launch of Intuitive Machines headlining the IM-2 mission, which not only carries the Nova Sea lunar lander called Athena, or ADDI for short, but also the Lunar Trailblazer from JPL, the Odin spacecraft from Astroforge, and another 16-unit CubeSat rideshare mission coming from Epic Aerospace. If all that wasn't enough, that's just on one Falcon 9 rocket. That's followed up presumably by the launch of the Ariane 6 lifting off from Europe Spaceport down in Kourou, French Guiana. Again, that launch has been delayed from its planned liftoff on the 26th. TBD exactly when it will be flying. We're also tracking the launches of the Soyuz Progress MS-30 mission, a cargo flight up to the International Space Station. We've got the Sphere X and Punch mission that's lifting off now no earlier than Friday, February 28th, and somewhere in the mix, potentially as early as Wednesday, we may see the launch of Starship Flight 8. Again, giant asterisk on that there are some notices that suggest a launch in that pocket of time, but SpaceX has so far not said anything definitive about that publicly. Given all that, we certainly hope you have enjoyed the coverage today. If you do us a favor, click that subscribe button. Become a channel member if you'd like to support us in a more sustaining fashion, as we are going to be hitting the road starting off next week with several important briefings on the forthcoming Crew 10 flight to the International Space Station, the return of Crew 9, and a little bit on the launch of Johnny Kim on his Soyuz flight coming up in April. For now, though, I want to thank our team here for this launch coverage today. Thanks to our friends P. Carsons with MaxQ Productions, to Check and Jen Briggs with C&J Images for helping to support our tracking coverage. Big thanks to our friend John Pisani helping us out here at the press site with tracking the Falcon 9 rocket. I want to thank our moderators in the live chat, Callistia Lee, Rick Donner, Aussie Space Girl, all helping us out here. See Michael Kane cruising in, hanging out with folks in the live chat as well. Appreciate you, Michael. I want to thank our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, for running the technical operations of the broadcast. Most importantly, I want to thank you for wherever you are watching from, here in Florida or elsewhere around the world. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, I'm Will Robinson Smith. Remember, be good to yourselves, be good to others, and we will see you next time, folks. And until then, bye-bye.